I swear to God, I don't know what it is about people who think that guys are not attractive physically, but...
On November 2nd, 2007, the police in Perugia, Italy, received an emergency call. A report had come in from a student house where something didn't seem right. The front door of the house had been left open. There were bloodstains in several places. And most importantly, the door to one of the residents' rooms was locked, and no matter how many times they called her name, there was no answer.
Pronto, buongiorno. Pronto, entrato in casa c'è mamma finestra, non può dissolvere, c'è un offer ci sa. Mattia, sono per la fecca Perugia.
Furto in abitazione,
c'è foto.
A police patrol unit arrived at the scene. The officers knocked on the door several times. There was no response. When their attempt to unlock the door failed, no one even took a single step forward. Everyone froze right there in front of the door. What was waiting for them was a full-scale crime scene. Bloodstains were spread across the walls, the floor, and the clothes. In the middle of the room lay the body of a 21-year-old woman named Meredith Kercher, hidden beneath a blanket, with only her left foot sticking out from underneath it.
Buonasera, parla che le giornali dell'Umbria che apre come un notizia virtuosa. Meredith Kercher, a 22 anni di nazionalità inglese, hanno trovato morta nella sua abitazione di via della Pergola, con tele in piacere emersi. Dicono che si tratta di un omicidio.
The police immediately escorted everyone out of the house. It didn't take long before the crime scene investigators, detectives, and reporters gathered at the scene. The area around house number 7 was now filled with the crackling of police radios and the flashes of journalists' cameras, all trying to get ahead of one another. But the officers' first priority was clear: securing the scene, isolating the witnesses, and collecting the very first pieces of the puzzle. But for us to truly understand what happened, we have to go back a few hours, back to the night of the murder, Halloween night. After having dinner with her friends at around 8:45 p.m., Meredith parted ways with the group and started walking home. The last message she sent to one of her friends said, "I'm really tired. I'm going home to sleep." The house number 7 we've been talking about was an old 2-story villa. 4 female students lived upstairs and 4 male students lived downstairs. But that night, the villa was practically empty. The guys were all out at a party. Philomena and Laura were out of town, and Amanda had spent the night at her boyfriend Raffaele's apartment. The next morning, Amanda decided to go back home to take a shower and change her clothes. As soon as she arrived, she noticed the first unusual sign. The front door was half open. Amanda walked inside. The house was eerily quiet, but there were no obvious signs of a struggle or anything being ransacked. She went straight to the bathroom. There, she was met with a strange sight. A few dried drops of blood were on the sink, and there was a large reddish stain on the bath mat. Amanda later said those stains made her a little uneasy, but not enough to stop her from taking a shower and brushing her teeth. The real fear hit her when she was standing in front of the mirror, drying her hair. That's when she noticed the toilet. There was human feces inside that hadn't been flushed. That disturbing sight, combined with the bloodstains, terrified her so much that she immediately ran out of the house. Half an hour later, she returned with her boyfriend, Raffaele. This time, they noticed something new. The door to Meredith's room was locked from the inside. When repeated knocks on the door and shouting Meredith's name brought no response, they decided to call the police. But before the patrol car arrived, another group of officers showed up outside the house. They weren't homicide detectives, and they weren't carrying sidearms on their belts. They were postal police, and they had come for an entirely different reason. Earlier that morning, 2 mobile phones had been found in a nearby garden. By tracing the SIM cards, the postal police had tracked the phones back to this address to locate their owner. It didn't take long for them to discover that the phones belonged to none other than Meredith Kercher. Then came the arrival of the patrol officers, the door being forced open, the discovery of the body, and the crime scene being sealed off. Right in the middle of those tense moments, one of the officers noticed something unusual. Outside the house, while everyone was still in shock over the discovery of the body, Amanda and Raffaele were seen kissing each other. For some people, it might have been nothing more than a defensive reaction to overwhelming stress, but for the police and the reporters, who were desperate to find the very first clue. That image meant something entirely different. A strange contrast had been created. Inside the house was a brutal crime scene. Outside, a quiet romantic moment. It was as if there was a gap between those two images, a gap that no detective's logic could easily explain. But before anything else, let's take a closer look at the crime scene itself. There were clear signs of severe violence on the victim's body. The bruises on her face, nose, and beneath her jaw showed that someone had held Meredith's mouth shut with all their strength so her screams couldn't be heard. Several shallow cuts on the palms of her hands told the story of resistance. And finally, there was a deep wound to her neck, which can be considered the primary cause of death. All of this tells us one thing. The struggle had not been short. It had not been over quickly. The medical examiner later determined that the time of death was late on the night of November 1st, the same Halloween night. But the biggest mystery wasn't limited to Meredith's room. There was important evidence inside Filomena's room. The window had been broken. Shards of glass were scattered everywhere. The room had been ransacked. At first glance, everything looked like a burglary. But there was one major contradiction. The broken glass was lying on top of the clothes, not underneath them, which meant the room had been ransacked first, and the window had been broken afterward. In other words, we were looking at a poorly staged scene. There were two more details that strengthened the theory that the scene had been staged: the blanket and the locked door. Meredith's body had been covered with a blanket. In criminology, that usually suggests remorse or shame. The killer can't bear to look into the victim's eyes, so they cover the body in an attempt to ease the burden of guilt. It's a behavior often seen in inexperienced killers, or killers who personally knew the victim. Even the lead detective on the case believed that this act carried what he described as a feminine signature. Some women, even during a violent crime, tend to preserve the dignity of the victim's body, especially if the victim is another woman. The next point was the locked bedroom door. The logical scenario was that after the murder, the killer took Meredith's keys, locked the bedroom door, and left with them. Why? Because they wanted to buy time and delay the discovery of the body for as long as possible. When those two details were placed alongside the rest of the evidence, it began to look as though someone had deliberately staged the entire crime scene. Let's go back to the crime scene, to the moment when the detectives took Amanda into the kitchen and asked her to check the knife drawer to see if anything was missing. Suddenly, Amanda had what appeared to be a severe, nervous breakdown. She repeatedly struck her ears and her head with her hands and began screaming. That unusual reaction caused the inspection of the remaining knives to be left unfinished. From the detective's point of view, it didn't look like an ordinary psychological response. Eventually, the laboratory's preliminary results pushed the mystery to its peak. In the bathroom, investigators found bloodstains containing a mixture of Meredith's DNA and that of another person. Different footprints were also documented throughout various parts of the house. The biological traces didn't all belong to the same individual. Now the detectives were faced with the biggest question of all. Were they dealing with a stranger who had broken in through the window to commit a sexual assault, or someone the victim knew, someone who had tried to erase their own trail by staging the crime scene? Meredith Kercher was a student at the University of Leeds who had come to Italy to spend a semester abroad. Because of that, the people closest to her were mainly her roommates and her friends from university. The police, following standard procedure, began their investigation with the people who had been closest to the victim. But what initially looked like routine questioning soon turned into formal interrogation, because the physical evidence was gradually beginning to point toward the residents of house number 7. The turning point came when the detectives turned off the lights at the crime scene and sprayed luminol across the floor. In complete darkness, bloody footprints that were invisible to the naked eye began to glow. Footprints that led directly from the victim's room to Amanda's bedroom. It looked as though someone had carefully tried to wash away the blood without realizing that the effort would be useless. That new piece of evidence was enough for the police to place Amanda and Raffaele under intense scrutiny. The point was, their behavior alone already seemed suspicious. Amanda was doing yoga stretches in the hallways of the police station. Sometimes, she even joked with her boyfriend right in front of the officers. When one of the roommates, fighting back tears, said, "I hope Meredith didn't suffer," Amanda calmly replied, "Of course she suffered. Her throat was cut." A few days later, photographs of Amanda and Raffaele laughing while shopping for underwear were published. The images shocked the public. The shop assistant later said she had overheard them talking about how well things were going in their sex life. The police, who had already been monitoring their phone calls, soon noticed another major contradiction. The same Amanda, who had screamed at the sight of the knives in the kitchen, was laughing on the phone with her friends and talking enthusiastically about her new boyfriend. At the same time all of this was happening, Raffaele's story also began to fall apart inside the interrogation room. At first, he had said that he had spent the entire night with his girlfriend, but under the pressure of questioning, he changed his statement. He said, "I think Amanda left the apartment for a few hours that night." That contradiction in Raffaele's statement led to Amanda being taken into the interrogation room alone, a session where there was no lawyer, no interpreter, and not even an audio or video recorder to document what had actually happened. The interrogation lasted between 7 and 10 hours. The police repeatedly told her that Raffaele had testified against her and that they had evidence linking her to the murder. Amanda later claimed that during that interrogation, she had even been physically struck in an attempt to force a confession. The police denied that allegation, but the real turning point came at the height of the interrogation. In the middle of her statements, Amanda suddenly mentioned a name that exploded like a bomb in the case: Patrick Lumumba. Patrick was the owner of the local bar where Amanda worked. Amanda claimed that on the night of the murder, she had seen Patrick inside Meredith's room. What made that allegation seem credible to the police was a text message. Patrick had texted Amanda, telling her not to come to work that night, and Amanda had replied. The Italian detectives interpreted that message literally. To them, it was evidence of a secret meeting arranged to carry out the crime, but in everyday English, it was simply a casual way of saying goodbye. In the tense atmosphere surrounding the investigation, however, no one was interested in cultural context. The police now believed they had found the third piece of the puzzle.
Io voglio tornare a casa. Io voglio tornare alla mia vita. Io non voglio essere punita, privata dalla mia vita, della mia fortuna per qualcosa che non ho fatto. Perché io sono innocente.
The following morning, after the shock of the interrogation had begun to wear off, Amanda wrote a handwritten letter. It was, in fact, her first attempt to withdraw her confession. She wrote, "I want to talk about the statements I made last night, because I myself doubt the truth of that information. I said all of those things under pressure, humiliation, and extreme exhaustion. In reality, I couldn't clearly remember what had happened, and Patrick Lumumba's name simply came into my mind. But for the Perugia police, it was already too late. That retraction did nothing to erase their suspicions. In the detectives' minds, a theory had already taken shape. They called it the fatal sex game. The lead detective believed this crime could not have been committed by a single person. In his view, the condition of Meredith's body and the level of violence showed that she had been restrained by several people. But what was the motive? The detective pointed to the contrast between the personalities of the two young women. Meredith was quiet, disciplined, and focused on her studies. Amanda was bold, carefree, and uninhibited. According to this theory, Amanda resented Meredith's orderly lifestyle and wanted to humiliate her. The detectives believed that, on the night of the murder, Amanda, Raffaele, and Patrick surrounded Meredith in her room, trying to force her into a violent sexual game against her will, something that may have begun as a reckless game, but, after Meredith resisted, escalated into a violent struggle and ultimately ended with her throat being cut. But this theory had one major problem. All of the DNA evidence recovered from the murder room belonged to only one unidentified person. There was no trace of Amanda, Raffaele, or Patrick inside the room. Even so, Amanda Knox, Raffaele Sollecito, and Patrick Lumumba were arrested and taken into custody on suspicion of murder.
Perché se lo era immaginato?
Why? I was stressed, I was scared, it was after long hours, it was in the middle of the night, I was innocent, and they were telling me that I was guilty.
Che cosa le diceva la polizia?
The police were telling me that we know you were at our house, we know you left the house, and was the moment before I said Patrick's name, someone was showing me the message that I was sent on the phone.
The case against Patrick Lumumba lasted less than 2 weeks. It soon became clear that Patrick had an undeniable alibi for the night of the murder. He had spent the entire evening working at his bar, in full view of several witnesses. After Patrick was released, the police once again focused their attention on Amanda and Raffaele. Each time they told their story, some part of it changed. Around the same time, the forensic laboratory results also began to arrive, one after another. The evidence collected by the crime scene investigators was now being turned into forensic evidence. For example, the police recovered a kitchen knife from Raffaele's apartment, a knife with a blade approximately 20 centimeters long. It was claimed that Meredith's DNA had been found on the blade and Amanda's DNA on the handle. Then came another highly controversial piece of evidence, Meredith's bra clasp. It was discovered 46 days after the murder, underneath a rug at the crime scene. According to the forensic report, Raffaele's DNA was found on the clasp. Then came the most important part of all, the victim herself. The autopsy confirmed that Meredith Kercher had been sexually assaulted before her death. She had been suffocated and finally murdered by a knife wound. By this point, almost everything seemed to be pointing toward Amanda and Raffaele, but hidden within those same reports were details that didn't fit the accusations. One of them was the footprint of another individual found in different parts of the house, a footprint that introduced a new name into the investigation, Rudy Guede. Rudy was a 20-year-old man, originally from the Ivory Coast, who had grown up in Perugia since childhood. He was friends with some of the young men living downstairs and also knew Meredith. There were even reports that, a few weeks before the murder, the two had been sitting together in a local bar, watching the England versus South Africa Rugby World Cup match. Reports showed that Rudy had left Italy for Germany just a few days after the murder. However, on November 18th, with the help of one of Rudy's friends, police managed to contact him through Skype. The conversation was secretly recorded. During that call, Rudy began describing the events from his own point of view. He said, "I was at Meredith's house that night. I went to the bathroom for a few moments, and suddenly I heard a scream. When I rushed out, I saw an unknown man running out of the house in a hurry. It was dark, so I couldn't see his face. I went to Meredith. Her throat had been cut and she was dying. Out of fear and because I wanted to keep her warm and stop the bleeding somehow, I covered her with the blanket. I remember that when I left the house, no windows were broken. That means someone entered the house after I left." 2 days after that call, on November 20th, police arrested Rudy Guede on a train and brought him back to Italy. Now the detectives were facing a new puzzle. The biological evidence undeniably placed Rudy inside the victim's room. His DNA was found on Meredith's clothing, inside and on her body. His footprint stretched from the bedroom to the front door. His bloody fingerprint was discovered on the pillow beneath Meredith's head. Even the feces left in the toilet belonged to him. But the prosecution argued that Rudy's presence did not necessarily prove the innocence of the others. According to prosecutors, Rudy was simply the third side of the triangle that also included Amanda and Raffaele, the same theory of the fatal sex game, only this time with Rudy Guede included in the scenario, fueled by alcohol and drugs. Although there was evidence that seemed to support that theory, there were also parts of the puzzle that simply didn't fit together. For example, if Amanda had truly been inside Meredith's room during the murder, why was there no direct biological trace of her inside the room? Or if Raffaele had played a direct role in the attack, why was the only evidence linking him to the crime scene a bra clasp discovered 46 days later? And finally, if all three had participated in the murder together, why did each of their stories move in completely different directions? The police had answers to those questions, but most of those answers were still based on interpretation and theory rather than hard evidence. And it was right at this point that the case entered its most complicated and controversial phase, the battle of narratives inside the courtroom.
I did not see into the room. Myra's away, all I heard from her was blood and a foot. The thing that they really wanted me to do was to go through the knife drawers. And it really hit me.
But before we step into the courtroom, we need to leave the interrogation rooms for a moment and look outside, out into the streets, because a parallel narrative was beginning to take shape there. A narrative that was becoming far more powerful than the evidence itself. And at the center of that narrative stood Amanda Knox. The headline, "An American college student at the center of an Italian murder case," was enough on its own to sell newspapers. But the media wanted even more fuel for the fire. The video of Amanda kissing Raffaele just a few meters away from the house where Meredith's body had been discovered. The photographs of the two of them shopping for red underwear only days after the murder. And the reports about Amanda doing yoga stretches inside the police station all became pieces of a puzzle that painted the image of a cold-blooded monster, a young woman who seemed completely unaffected by the brutal death of her roommate. The next step came quickly. The media dug up the nickname Amanda had chosen years earlier for her MySpace account, Foxy Knoxy, a nickname that had once been nothing more than a childish joke, had now become the front-page headline of sensational newspapers. In their eyes, Amanda was too free, too sexual, too different. Long before the judge opened the first session of the trial, the media had already found her guilty. She was no longer just a suspect. She had become a phenomenon, someone the public was desperate to watch fall.
All right, I'm Amanda. Very excited to see David. That's you with David.
Oh,
Very excited to go live in Italy.
In December 2009, the first trial began, a trial that lasted nearly one full year, almost 50 intense court hearings with dozens of witnesses, eventually ending with the harshest possible verdict. Amanda was sentenced to 26 years in prison. Raffaele received 25 years. Rudy Guede, whose case had been separated from the others, was sentenced in a fast-track trial to 30 years in prison.
Just hours ago, 22-year-old college student Amanda Knox finally learned her fate. After 11 hours of deliberations, the verdict was read by the presiding judge.
Dichiara Knox, Amanda, Meredith, Sollecito, Raffaele, colpevoli dei reati loro ascritti.
Amanda and Raffaele guilty of the murder of 21-year-old Meredith Kercher. With a white-hot glare, reporters and cameras from around the world trained on her, Amanda was led away in a black van just moments after the verdict was read. Amanda's parents, Kurt Knox and Adam Ellis, have spent nearly $1 million defending their daughter and have made 24 trips to be at their daughter's side in the courtroom and in jail.
Everything seemed to be over, but a major doubt had begun to consume the defense team. The defense attorneys turned their attention to the forensic laboratory and asked one critical question. When the murder knife was examined, was the testing environment completely isolated? The answer they received was astonishing. One of the laboratory experts admitted, no. At the same time, we were examining around 50 different items belonging to the victim. We couldn't stop all of our work just because of this one case. That was the moment the defense focused on what they believed was the biggest weakness in the prosecution's case: environmental contamination. When investigators are dealing with an extremely small amount of DNA, sometimes no more than a few cells, the smallest mistake can transfer biological material from one object to another. For example, from a piece of clothing to a knife. The bra clasp raised the same concern. How could anyone rely on evidence that had been discovered 46 days after the murder, underneath a rug that dozens of investigators had already walked across without proper protective equipment? To the defense, this wasn't scientific investigation. It was complete negligence. Using that argument, the case moved to the Court of Appeal. 2 independent university experts were appointed to review the forensic evidence. Their report landed like a fatal blow. Its conclusion, in a single sentence, was simple. The police had violated even the most basic scientific protocols. The knife and the bra clasp had no scientific value as evidence. With those 2 pieces of evidence removed, the prosecution's entire case collapsed.
In nome del popolo italiano, la Corte di Assise di Appello di Perugia assolve entrambi gli imputati dai reati loro ascritti ai capi A, B, C e D per non aver commesso il fatto.
The judge declared that Amanda and Raffaele had committed no crime. He acquitted them and ordered their immediate release. The very next day, Amanda left Italy and returned to Seattle. It marked the end of a 4-year nightmare, one that had transformed an unknown college student into the most famous murder suspect in the world.
Great news tonight. Amanda Knox finally home now with the plane carrying her and her family was that July pictured out that crushed up media well-wishers are waiting for her at the Seattle to come to the airport.
There she is, there she is, there she is, there she is, there she is. One down. She's there. She's there. She is coming down the stairs. She's coming down the stairs. Coming down the stairs. Coming down the stairs.
But this legal marathon was far from over. For years, the case continued to move through Italy's judicial system until, in 2013, the acquittal was overturned. 1 year later, another court once again found Amanda and Raffaele guilty. Amanda, now back in the United States, said, "I will never voluntarily return to Italy." With the full support of the U.S. government for its citizen, the case reached a diplomatic deadlock. Finally, in mid-March 2015, Italy's Supreme Court convened one last time to bring the case to an end. The judges concluded that the DNA evidence had been contaminated, the confessions had been obtained under pressure, and there was no direct biological evidence placing Amanda or Raffaele inside the murder room. Based on those findings, Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito were declared innocent. Now, whether the official letters sent by an American judge on Washington court letterhead or the private negotiations between U.S. senators and the President of Italy had any influence on that final decision is a question that may never be answered. But for the angry crowds gathered outside the courthouse, the reality felt very different. They believed their country had surrendered to pressure from Washington, and that, in the end, only one man had been left to bear the blame, a black man. Perhaps the most controversial reaction came from the judge himself. Years later, in an interview, he said, "Rudy Guede knows what happened that night. Perhaps the other two know as well. Our acquittal was the result of the truth established within the framework of the court, but the real truth may be something else entirely." One remarkable thing about this case was that, over the years, Meredith Kercher's name gradually faded into the background of the headlines. The spotlight remained fixed on Amanda. Meredith became little more than the victim in Amanda Knox's case, nothing more. The Kercher family never truly accepted the acquittal or everything that followed. They remained convinced that Amanda was guilty.
Thank you to everyone who's believed in me, who's defended me, who's supported my family. Thank you for being there for me.
After the appeal process, Rudy Guede's sentence was reduced from 30 years to 16 years. Throughout his years in prison, he repeatedly requested a review of his case. Every request was denied. Even so, until the very last day of his imprisonment, Rudy continued to insist on one thing: "I wasn't alone. Someone else was in that house that night." A claim that was never proven and never disproven in any court of law. Life, however, took a very different path for everyone else. Amanda has spent the years since then working as an author and as an advocate for people who have been wrongfully convicted. Raffaele also moved on with his life. He began working in the field of technology and data analysis. The relationship between Amanda and Raffaele, which had already begun to crack under the pressure of the investigation and interrogations, came to an end shortly after they were released. It was over, for good. Not long afterward, Amanda got married. Rudy Guede eventually completed his prison sentence and was released in 2021. But the real truth most likely remained buried inside that locked bedroom in house number 7 on Halloween night in 2007, along with Meredith Kercher.
She deserved so much, honestly. I'm a lucky one.